You might want to think twice before you finish that arrest, the man said quietly, his voice steady enough to cut through the hum of flashing lights and distant traffic. But Officer Daniel Hayes didn't even look at him at first, too busy adjusting his stance beside the dark sedan, pulled halfway onto the shoulder of the road, rain tapping softly against the roof like a slow-ticking clock, red and blue reflections sliding across the wet pavement and crawling up the man's jacket, a simple black windbreaker that gave nothing away, nothing except how calm he seemed, which was the first thing that fell off, because people in this situation didn't stand like that, didn't breathe like that, didn't meet a cop's silence with silence of their own. But Marcus Reed did, his hands visible, relaxed at his sides, his eyes not defiant, not fearful, just present, like he was watching something unfold that he had already seen before. Hayes finally turning his head with a slight smirk, the kind that came from years of assuming control before a word was even spoken, license and registration. He said flatly, though Marcus had already handed them over minutes ago, the paper still tucked under Hayes's arm, forgotten or ignored. It didn't matter, because this wasn't about paperwork anymore. It was about something else, something unspoken but thick in the air. The second officer, Ryan Cole, shifting his weight behind Hayes, glancing briefly at Marcus with a look that hovered between curiosity and caution, as if trying to place him in a category that didn't quite fit. Step out of the vehicle, Hayes added, sharper now, and Marcus complied without hesitation, door opening with a soft click, shoes touching the wet asphalt, the faint scent of rain and oil rising up around them, his movements slow, deliberate, controlled, and that control lingered, even as Hayes circled him once, eyes scanning, searching for something that would justify the tone already set. You in a hurry tonight? Hayes asked, casual but edged, Marcus shaking his head once. No, sir, he replied, respectful. Even, the word sir landing without resistance, and that should have settled it, should have de-escalated the moment into routine, but it didn't, because Hayes leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to feel personal. You sure about that? And Marcus paused, just for a fraction of a second, not out of fear, but calculation, his gaze drifting past Hayes for a brief moment, catching the small blinking light on the officer's chest, the body cam recording every breath, every word, every shift in posture, and then back again. Calm as before. Are you? He asked quietly, and something in that answer, in the way it didn't rise or fall, didn't challenge yet didn't yield, caused the air to tighten just slightly. Cole noticing it now, his brow pulling in, Hayes straightening, the smirk fading just enough to reveal irritation underneath, rain growing steadier, tapping louder now, like the world was leaning in to listen, Marcus standing there, unmoving, unshaken, as if the moment hadn't reached him yet, or maybe as if he was waiting for it to reach its breaking point first. The rain thickened, not heavy enough to drown the moment, but steady enough to blur the edges of everything, turning the flashing lights into smeared streaks across the asphalt. And Hayes shifted again, slower this time, like something had slipped just out of place, and he could not name it yet. You got a problem answering simple questions? He asked, his tone no longer casual. Marcus shook his head once, calm, measured. No, sir, he said. Same even voice, same steady breathing, and that consistency, that refusal to rise or fall with the pressure, made the silence stretch tighter. Cole glanced between them, his fingers brushing lightly against his radio, but not pressing it. Not yet, as if instinct told him to wait. Hayes exhaled sharply and took a half step closer, the kind meant to assert space, to remind who controlled the moment. Then do not play games with me, he said, quieter now, and Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the words without surrendering to them, his eyes flicking once more toward the small blinking camera, then back to Hayes. I am not playing, he replied, and again that same tone, no edge, no fear, just clarity, and it landed differently this time, not as defiance, but as something heavier, something that did not belong to the roadside at all. Hayes noticed it, even if he would not admit it, his jaw tightening just enough to show it. Step over here, he said, gesturing toward the front of the patrol car, and Marcus complied, shoes moving across the wet ground with soft, controlled steps, stopping exactly where indicated, not an inch more, not an inch less, the kind of precision that felt practiced, intentional. Cole watching more closely now, his earlier uncertainty sharpening into focus. You said you are not in a hurry. Hayes continued, pacing once in front of Marcus. So you will not mind if we take a closer look at your vehicle. It was not phrased as a question, and the air shifted again, quieter this time. Like something settling before a storm, Marcus tilted his head slightly, not confused, just considering. Is there a reason? He asked, simple, direct. And that question, ordinary in any other setting, landed with weight here, because it required something Hayes had not prepared to give, a reason that would hold, that would sound right not just now, but later, under a different light, under different eyes. Hayes paused, just for a fraction of a second, then brushed past it. Routine, he said, quick, dismissive, but Cole's eyes flicked up at that, catching the hesitation, catching the gap. Marcus held the silence after that answer, not filling it, not challenging it, just letting it sit there between them, and the longer it sat, the more it seemed to grow, stretching into something neither officer could easily step around. Rain tapping against the hood, radio crackling faintly with distant chatter that did not belong to them. Marcus finally speaking again, softer this time, almost reflective. Routine can mean a lot of things, he said, and Hayes let out a short breath, impatience slipping through. It means do not worry about it, he replied. But the words lacked the certainty they carried before. Cole shifted. Again, this time more noticeably, his gaze moving from Marcus to Hayes and back, something clicking into place that he could not ignore anymore. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly, not in submission, but in thought, then looked up again, meeting Hayes with the same steady calm. Everything happening right now, he said slowly, carefully, is being seen exactly as it is, and this time, there was no mistaking it. The weight behind the words, the quiet certainty that did not belong to someone guessing or hoping, but to someone who already knew. Hayes did not respond immediately, the rain filling the space where his voice should have been. And for the first time since the stop began, control did not feel absolute anymore. It felt observed. Hayes let the silence hang, but it did not feel like his silence anymore. It felt like something he had stepped into without realizing. Something already in motion long before the flashing lights ever lit up that stretch of road. And he shifted his weight again, slower now, more deliberate, like he was trying to regain ground that had quietly slipped beneath him. You keep talking like that, he said, his voice lower, tighter. And it is going to make things harder than they need to be. Marcus did not react the way most people would. No raised voice, no defensive posture, just a slight tilt of his head, as if he was listening past the words instead of to them. Rain tracing thin lines down his jacket, catching on the edge of his collar, the sound steady, almost rhythmic. I am not trying to make anything harder, Marcus replied, calm. Even, I am trying to make sure it is clear. And that word lingered, clear, simple, direct, but heavy in a way that made Cole's eyes narrow slightly. Because clarity meant something very different when everything was being recorded, when every word could be played back, slowed down, examined. Hayes let out a short breath, stepping away for a second, running a hand along the edge of the patrol car like he needed something solid to anchor himself. You think you know how this works? He asked without looking at Marcus, and Marcus answered without hesitation. I know exactly how this works. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain, and that certainty landed harder than any raised voice could have. Cole shifted again, this time stepping half a pace closer, his gaze flicking briefly to the body cam, then back to Marcus, then to Hayes, connecting pieces that had not seemed connected before. Hayes turned back, slower this time, studying Marcus more carefully, really looking now, not just seeing a man pulled over on a wet road, but noticing the details that did not fit, the posture too controlled, the tone too measured, the eyes too steady. What is your name? Hayes asked suddenly, sharper than before, like he needed something concrete to hold on to. Marcus answered without pause. Marcus Reed. And the name settled into the air between them, ordinary on its own, but in this moment it felt like something more, like a key placed quietly on a table. Hayes repeated it under his breath, testing it, searching for recognition that did not come fast enough. Cole's brow furrowed, the name brushing against something in his memory, something he could not quite reach yet. You live around here, Marcus? Hayes continued, the question almost automatic now, but the tone behind it no longer carried the same weight. Marcus shook his head slightly. "No, sir." Again that same respect, that same calm, and it only made the gap between them wider, because respect without submission felt unfamiliar, unsettling. Hayes took a step closer again, but this time there was hesitation in it, a fraction of a second where he seemed to reconsider, and Marcus noticed, not reacting outwardly, but the shift was there. Subtle, controlled, like he had been waiting for that moment. "You said everything is being seen," Hayes said slowly, choosing each word now instead of throwing them. "Seen by who?" And the question hung there, heavier than anything before, because now it mattered. Now it was not about control in the moment, but about what came after. Marcus held his gaze, steady, unwavering, rain tapping softly around them, the distant hum of a passing car fading into the background, and for the first time, he allowed a small pause before answering, just long enough to let the weight settle. "By the people who need to see it," he said, and this time, the words did not just sit in the air, they pressed into it, into Hayes, into Cole, into the quiet space between flashing lights and wet pavement, and something shifted again, deeper now, not just uncertainty, but realization beginning to take shape, slow and unavoidable, like a line being crossed that could not be uncrossed once seen. Hayes did not answer right away, and that alone was new, because silence had always been something he controlled, something he used, but now it felt like it was closing in around him instead, the rain growing louder against the pavement, each drop sharp, deliberate, like a countdown he could not stop. He glanced toward Cole, just for a second, and in that second he saw it. Not fear, not yet, but doubt, real doubt. The kind that spreads quietly and refuses to leave once it settles in. "People who need to see it," Hayes repeated, slower now, like he was testing the weight of the phrase, trying to find the edge of it. Marcus did not move, did not shift, his posture unchanged, his breathing steady, as if this moment had already played out somewhere else, and he was simply letting it catch up. Cole cleared his throat lightly, not loud, but enough to break the rhythm. "Hey, Hayes," he said, careful, measured. "Maybe we should just run his information and keep it clean." The words were simple, routine even, but the tone behind them was different, not supportive, not fully aligned. More like a suggestion made to avoid something neither of them wanted to name. Hayes did not respond to Cole immediately, his eyes still locked on Marcus, searching, recalculating, trying to piece together what did not fit. "You said your name is Marcus Reed," he said again, and this time there was something else behind it, something closer to recognition trying to surface. Marcus gave a slight nod. Nothing more. The movement small but intentional, like confirming a fact that had already been decided. Hayes took a breath, deeper this time, the kind that came before a decision, but instead of speaking, he reached for his radio, his thumb hovering over the button for just a fraction too long, as if something was stopping him, something that had not been there before. Cole noticed it, his eyes narrowing slightly, his attention no longer split, fully focused now. "You want me to call it in?" Cole asked, and Hayes hesitated. Again, just enough for it to be seen, just enough for it to matter. Marcus watched the exchange without interruption, without urgency, his gaze moving briefly between them, not tracking movement, but measuring it, and then back to Hayes, calm as before. "You should," Marcus said quietly, and the simplicity of it landed heavier than anything else he had said so far, because it was not a challenge, not a warning. It was a statement, like he was guiding the moment instead of reacting to it. Hayes finally pressed the radio, the soft click cutting through the rain, followed by the low crackle of static. His voice came next, but it was different now, tighter, more controlled, like he was choosing each word carefully instead of letting them fall. "Dispatch. This is Unit 34, requesting a check on a Marcus Reed." He paused, then added, "Possible out of state." The radio answered with a brief acknowledgement, routine, distant, unaware of the weight hanging at the side of the road. Hayes lowered the radio slowly, his grip lingering on it for a second longer than necessary. Cole shifted his stance again, glancing once more at Marcus, then at the blinking light on the body cam, then back to Hayes, the pieces coming together faster now, not fully formed, but enough to change how the moment felt. The rain continued, steady, unbothered, the lights still flashing, but the energy had shifted completely. What had started as control now felt like exposure, like something unfolding, that could not be contained once it reached a certain point. Marcus finally spoke again, softer than before, but clearer. "You might want to listen closely to what comes back," he said. And this time, neither officer dismissed it, neither brushed it aside, because now they were both waiting. The radio crackled again, louder this time, the static cutting through the rain like a blade, and both men turned toward it instinctively, not because they were told to, but because something in the air had already shifted enough to pull their attention there. Unit 34. The dispatcher's voice came through, steady, professional, but there was a pause behind it, a hesitation that did not belong in. "Routine traffic." Hayes's grip tightened slightly around the radio, his eyes flicking once toward Marcus, then back down. "Go ahead," he replied, and for the first time, his voice did not sound like it owned the moment. It sounded like it was waiting for it. Another brief crackle, then the dispatcher continued, slower now. "Be advised. Marcus Reed is flagged under federal jurisdiction." The words landed carefully, each one spaced just enough to be understood, just enough to carry weight. Cole's posture shifted immediately, his shoulders tightening, his eyes widening just a fraction. Hayes did not move at first, as if his body needed a second longer to catch up to what he had just heard. "Confirm," Hayes said, but the word came out quieter than intended. Less command, more need. The radio responded without delay this time. "Confirmed. Federal task designation. You are instructed to stand down and await further guidance." Silence followed. Heavy, complete, the kind that does not need to be announced because it fills everything on its own. Hayes lowered the radio slowly, his hand lingering midair as if unsure where to place it next. The rain continued, steady, indifferent. Marcus remained exactly where he had been, unmoved, unchanged, his expression calm, not triumphant, not relieved, just certain, like the moment had finally arrived where it was always meant to. Cole took a small step back without realizing it, creating space that had not been there before, his eyes now fixed on Marcus with a different kind of attention, not suspicion, not curiosity, but recognition. "You did not say," Cole murmured, more to himself than anyone else, and Marcus gave the smallest shake of his head. "You did not ask," he replied, his voice quiet but clear, and that simple exchange carried more weight than anything that had come before. Hayes finally looked up, really looked this time, not at a driver on the side of the road, not at a situation to control, but at a man who had been standing in front of him the entire time, unchanged, unaffected, his earlier certainty now unraveling piece by piece, replaced by something far less comfortable, awareness. "Why are you here?" Hayes asked, and the question no longer carried authority, it carried uncertainty. Marcus held his gaze for a moment, letting the rain fill the space between them, letting the flashing lights reflect off the wet ground like a silent witness to everything that had unfolded. And then he answered, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "To see how far it goes," he said, and the words settled over them, not as a threat, not as a declaration, but as a truth that had already been proven. The road stretched out behind them, empty, quiet, but the moment itself felt anything but small, because nothing about it could be undone, nothing about it could be unseen, and for the first time that night, neither officer spoke, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been set in motion. The silence did not break right away. It stretched, deep and heavy, as if the road itself was holding its breath, the rain still falling in steady lines that blurred the edges of everything, but somehow made the moment sharper, clearer. Hayes stood there with the radio still in his hand, no longer raised, no longer commanding, just there, like an object he did not quite know what to do with anymore. His eyes fixed on Marcus, searching again, but this time not for a mistake, not for a reason to push further, but for understanding. And what he found was not resistance, not anger, just stillness, the kind that does not need to prove anything. Cole shifted beside him, slower now, more careful, his earlier uncertainty settling into something closer to awareness, his gaze moving once more to the blinking light on the body camera, then back to Marcus, then to Hayes, as if seeing all three pieces of the moment at once for the first time. "We should," Cole started, then stopped, the sentence fading before it could fully form. because the next step was no longer routine. It was not written into the usual script. Hayes lowered the radio completely now, his arm dropping to his side. The movement quiet but heavy, like setting something down that could not be picked back up the same way. He took a breath, deeper than before, and stepped back. Half a pace, creating space that had not existed earlier, space that spoke louder than any words he could have chosen. Marcus noticed, but did not react outwardly. His posture unchanged, his hands still visible, relaxed, his eyes steady, observing without pressing, allowing the moment to unfold at its own pace. "Is there anything else you want to tell us?" Hayes asked finally, and the question was different now, stripped of its earlier edge, almost careful, as if he understood that the answer mattered more than the asking. Marcus held his gaze for a moment, letting the rain fill the silence between them, the distant sound of a passing truck rolling faintly across the highway, headlights sliding past and disappearing into the dark. "No," Marcus said simply, and the word landed clean. Without hesitation, without weight beyond its truth, Cole exhaled quietly, a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his shoulders loosening slightly. Though the tension in the air had not fully left, Hayes nodded once, a small movement, almost automatic, but it marked something, a shift, a line crossed and acknowledged. He reached toward Marcus's hands, then stopped himself halfway, the motion incomplete, reconsidered, and instead he stepped back again, choosing distance over control. "You are free to go," Hayes said, the words measured, deliberate, and for a moment they seemed to hang there, unfamiliar, like something that did not belong to the beginning of this night. Marcus did not move immediately, not out of hesitation, but intention, his eyes moving briefly to the body camera, then back to Hayes. And there was a pause, just long enough to be felt, long enough to remind both officers that the moment did not end when the words were spoken, only when it was understood. Then Marcus gave a slight nod, turned, and walked back toward his car, each step steady, unhurried, the sound of his shoes against the wet pavement soft but clear, the door opening with a quiet click, closing just as gently, the engine starting a moment later, low and controlled, headlights cutting through the rain as the car pulled back onto the road and disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the flashing lights, the steady rain, and two officers standing in a silence that no longer felt empty, because now it carried something else, something that would not fade as quickly as the sound of the engine, something that would stay long after the lights were turned off and the road returned to normal. The road felt different after the car disappeared, like something had been taken with it, something neither of them could quite name, and the flashing lights no longer looked like control. They looked like noise, reflections bouncing off wet pavement that now seemed too empty. Hayes stood still for a long moment, longer than necessary, his eyes fixed on the stretch of highway where Marcus's taillights had faded into darkness, the rain continuing its quiet rhythm against his uniform, soaking into the fabric, grounding him in a moment that no longer felt routine. Cole shifted beside him, slower, more deliberate, glancing once at Hayes before looking down at his own hands, then at the body camera still blinking steadily, still recording, always recording. That was not normal, Cole said finally, his voice low, careful, like he was testing the words before letting them exist. Hayes did not answer right away, his jaw tightening slightly, not in anger, but in thought, replaying every second, every word, every pause, the way Marcus had stood, the way he had spoken, the way nothing about him had changed from the moment the stop began to the moment it ended. And that consistency echoed now, louder than anything else. "No," Hayes said quietly, almost to himself. It was not. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, but neither of them reached for it immediately, because whatever came through now felt secondary to what had already happened. Cole finally stepped closer to the patrol car, glancing at the screen mounted inside, then back at Hayes. "You think this was random?" he asked, and the question hung there, heavier than expected, because it carried something deeper, something that suggested the night had not unfolded by chance. Hayes exhaled slowly, turning his head just enough to meet Cole's gaze. "No," he said again, this time with more certainty. "I do not think it was." And that realization settled in, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, like rain soaking into the ground, unavoidable, permanent. Cole looked back toward the empty road, the darkness swallowing everything beyond the reach of their lights. Then what was it? He asked, and Hayes did not respond immediately, because the answer was not simple. It was not something that could be explained in one sentence or dismissed as coincidence. It was something that had been building long before they stepped out of their vehicle, something that had been waiting, watching, recording. He finally reached up and turned off the flashing lights, the sudden absence of red and blue shifting the entire scene into something quieter, more real. The rain now the loudest sound again, steady, honest. It was a test, Hayes said, his voice low, measured, and the words felt right the moment they left him. Cole frowned slightly. A test, he repeated, and Hayes nodded once, slow, deliberate, his eyes still, fixed on the road ahead. Not of him, he added after a brief pause. Of us. And that silence that followed was different from before, not empty, not uncertain, but reflective, heavy with the understanding that nothing about that moment could be undone, that every decision, every word, every pause had been part of something larger than either of them had realized at the time. Cole looked down again at the blinking camera, then reached up and turned it off, the small light disappearing, but the absence of it did not erase what had already been captured, what had already been seen, and both of them knew it. Even without saying it, Hayes opened the patrol car door slowly, the creak of the hinge cutting through the rain, then paused, one hand resting on the frame, his reflection faintly visible in the dark glass. Not the same as it had been earlier, not as certain, not as controlled, but clearer in a different way. And as he sat down, the weight of the night did not lift, it settled, deep and quiet, like something that would stay with him long after the rain stopped and the road dried. Because some moments did not end when they were over, they ended when they were understood, and this one was not over yet. The patrol car door closed with a dull thud, softer than it should have sounded, as if even the metal understood the shift that had taken place. Hayes sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, his hands resting on the steering wheel, but not gripping it, just placed there, like he needed to feel something solid beneath them. The rain tapping steadily against the windshield, each drop catching the faint glow of the streetlights above, sliding down in uneven paths that blurred his reflection. Cole remained outside for a moment longer, standing beside the open passenger door, looking out at the empty road where Marcus had disappeared, as if expecting something to return, something to confirm that the moment had truly passed. But nothing came, just the low hum of distant traffic and the constant rhythm of rain. He finally stepped in, pulling the door shut behind him, the interior filling with a quiet that felt heavier than the storm outside. Neither of them spoke at first. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that could be said felt insufficient compared to what had already been shown. Hayes leaned back slightly in his seat, his eyes fixed forward, not on the road, but somewhere beyond it, replaying details that now stood out in ways they had not before. The way Marcus had never rushed a word, never filled a silence, never needed to raise his voice to be heard. And how that calm had not been passive, it had been deliberate, controlled, purposeful, like someone who already understood the outcome before the moment reached it. You ever get the feeling, Cole said slowly, breaking the silence without turning his head, that you just walked into something that started long before you showed up? Hayes did not answer immediately, his fingers tapping lightly once against the wheel, a small movement, almost unconscious, but it marked the thoughts settling deeper. Yeah, he said finally, his voice quieter than usual, not because he lacked confidence, but because the certainty had changed shape. And it is not over yet. Cole nodded slightly, though Hayes could not see it directly, his eyes dropping to the dashboard then. Lifting again, dispatch said federal, he added, as if saying it out loud would make it easier to process. But that was not just federal. Hayes exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to the rearview mirror for a brief moment, catching the faint outline of his own eyes staring back at him, sharper now, more aware. No, he replied. It was something else, and that something else lingered between them, unspoken but understood. The kind of realization that does not arrive all at once, but in layers, each one heavier than the last. The radio crackled again, softer this time, routine chatter from other units moving through their own nights, unaware of what had just unfolded here. Hayes reached up and turned the volume down, not off, just lower, as if he needed distance from the noise. You think they were watching the whole time? Cole asked, his voice careful, almost hesitant. Hayes paused, considering it, not dismissing it, not accepting it blindly, but weighing it against everything he had just experienced. I think, he said slowly, choosing each word with precision. We were not the only ones paying attention. The rain continued to fall, steady, unchanging, but inside the car, something had shifted completely. The kind of shift that does not announce itself, does not demand recognition, but settles in quietly, altering how every moment that follows will be seen. Cole leaned back in his seat, his shoulders no longer tense, but not relaxed either, just aware, and Hayes finally turned the key, the engine coming to life with a low hum, headlights cutting forward into the rain, illuminating the empty road ahead. And for a moment, neither of them moved, because driving away would mean leaving the moment behind, and both of them understood, without saying it, that this was not something they could simply leave on the side of the road, not something that would fade with distance, because some moments stayed with you, not as memories, but as questions, and this one had just begun to ask itself. The engine idled for a moment longer than necessary, a low steady hum filling the space between them as the windshield wipers swept back and forth in a slow rhythm, pushing away rain that returned just as quickly, like the night refused to clear itself. Hayes kept his hands on the wheel but did not press the gas yet, his eyes fixed ahead, not scanning, not searching, just holding the road in front of him like it might reveal something if he waited long enough. Cole shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his posture but not speaking right away, the silence no longer uncomfortable, just heavy with everything they had not said. You ever notice? Cole finally began, his voice quieter than before, more measured. How he never once asked what we were going to do. Hayes did not respond immediately, but the question landed, settling into the same space where everything else had begun to shift, because it was true. Marcus had not asked, had not negotiated, had not tried to steer the moment. He had simply stood there, as if the outcome had already been decided somewhere else. Yeah, Hayes said slowly, his voice low, thoughtful. He did not need to. And that realization lingered, sharper now, because it meant control had never actually been in their hands. Not in the way they had assumed. Cole leaned his head back slightly, eyes drifting up toward the roof for a second before returning forward. That means he knew, he said, not as a question, but as something closer to acceptance. Hayes nodded once, almost imperceptible, his gaze finally shifting from the road to the rearview mirror again, catching the faint reflection of his own face, still, focused, but different now. He knew. Hayes repeated, and then after a brief pause, he added, and he let it happen anyway. The weight of that thought settled deeper, because it changed everything about the moment. It was not just observation. It was allowance, intentional, controlled. Cole exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the edge of the window for a second before fading. So what does that make us? He asked, the question quiet but direct. Hayes did not answer right away, because the answer was not simple, not something that fit into a single word. It stretched beyond the stop, beyond the road, into something larger, something that did not end when the car drove away. The wipers continued their steady motion, back and forth, like a clock marking time that had already shifted meaning. It makes us part of it, Hayes said finally, his voice steady but subdued, and Cole nodded slightly, absorbing it, because there was no arguing with that. Not after what they had just experienced. Hayes finally pressed the gas, the patrol car rolling forward slowly at first, tires cutting through the thin layer of water on the road, headlights stretching into the darkness ahead. But even as they moved, the moment did not feel like it was behind them. It felt like it was coming with them, sitting quietly in the back seat, unseen but present. Cole glanced at the dashboard, then at the camera that had been turned off, then back at Hayes. You think they will follow up? He asked. Hayes kept his eyes on the road, hands steady now, but his mind clearly elsewhere. They already are, he said, and the certainty in his voice returned, but not the same certainty as before. This one was different, quieter, built on understanding instead of assumption. The road stretched out ahead, long and empty, but it no longer felt simple, no longer felt routine, because somewhere beyond the reach of their headlights, something had already been set in motion, something that would not be stopped by distance or time. And as the patrol car moved deeper into the night, the only sound that remained was the steady rhythm of rain and the quiet awareness that this was not the end of anything. It was only the moment they realized they had already been seen. The patrol car moved steadily through the rain, tires humming softly against the wet asphalt, the road stretching ahead in long, empty lines that felt quieter than before, not because the world had changed, but because something inside the car had. Hayes kept his eyes forward, hands firm on the wheel now, but not tense, just controlled, like he was driving with a different kind of awareness, the kind that does not come from habit, but from realization. Cole sat beside him, still, his gaze drifting occasionally toward the side mirror, then back ahead, as if expecting something to appear in the darkness behind them, something that would confirm this was not over. "You ever wonder," Cole said after a while, his voice low, cutting gently through the steady rhythm of the wipers, "how many times we thought we were in control, and we're not?" Hayes did not answer right away, but the question settled in, deeper than the ones before it, because it reached beyond the moment, beyond the stop, into something broader, something that touched every decision made without question, every assumption carried without doubt. "Yeah," Hayes said finally, his tone quieter, more grounded. "I think tonight answered that." Cole nodded slightly, though his eyes remained forward, focused on the road. He never raised his voice, he added, almost to himself, not once, and that detail lingered, because it stood in contrast to everything they had been trained to expect, everything they had come to rely on when reading a situation. Hayes exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible over the rain. "He did not need to," he said, echoing his earlier thought. But now it carried more weight, more clarity, because the meaning had settled deeper. Cole leaned back a little in his seat, his posture no longer rigid, but not relaxed either, just aware. Present, that kind of calm. Cole continued, choosing his words carefully. "That is not something you fake." Hayes shook his head once, a small, deliberate motion. "No, it is not," he replied, and the conversation faded again, not because it had ended, but because there was nothing left to add without repeating what they already understood. The road curved slightly ahead, disappearing into a stretch of darker highway where the streetlights thinned out, the patrol car's headlights cutting a narrow path through the rain, illuminating just enough to move forward, but not enough to see what lay beyond. Hayes adjusted his grip on the wheel, his fingers tightening briefly before settling again, and for a moment, his gaze dropped to the dashboard, to the silent camera that had been turned off, its dark lens reflecting a faint outline of his hand. "You think it matters that we turned it off?" Cole asked quietly, following his gaze. Hayes paused, considering it, not dismissing it, not brushing it aside, but weighing it against everything else. "No," he said after a moment, his voice steady, certain in a different way now. "I think it mattered before that." Cole nodded slowly, understanding settling in without resistance, because what had already been captured, what had already been seen, could not be undone by what came after. The rain continued its steady fall, the wipers kept their rhythm, and the car moved forward through the night. But the sense of movement did not feel like escape. It felt like continuation, like they were carrying the moment with them, not leaving it behind. Hayes finally spoke again, his voice low, reflective. He said it was being seen. He murmured, almost replaying the words out loud. Cole glanced at him briefly, then back to the road. "Yeah," he said. "And now we know he was right." Hayes nodded once, eyes forward again, focused but changed. "No," he corrected softly. "Now we know he was not guessing." And that distinction settled heavily, because it meant the moment had never been uncertain, never been a risk. It had been a process, unfolding exactly as intended. The patrol car continued down the highway, disappearing into the rain, but the quiet truth remained inside it, steady, undeniable. That control was not always about who gave the orders. Sometimes it was about who already knew how it would end. The highway stretched on without interruption, a long ribbon of wet asphalt reflecting the faint glow of distant lights, and the patrol car moved through it steadily. No sirens, no urgency, just motion, the kind that gives space for thoughts to settle deeper than before. Hayes kept his gaze forward, but his focus was no longer just on the road. It had turned inward, replaying not just what happened, but how it happened, every decision, every pause, every moment where he could have chosen differently and did not. Cole shifted slightly in his seat, his elbow resting near the window, eyes tracking the faint lines of rain as they slid across the glass. You ever think, Cole said quietly, that moments like that do not show you who someone else is, they show you who you are? The question did not feel casual, it landed with weight, with intention, and Hayes let it sit there for a moment, not rejecting it, not answering too quickly, because the truth in it was uncomfortable in a way that could not be ignored. Yeah, Hayes said finally, his voice lower now, more reflective than it had been all night. And I do not think we always like what we see. Cole nodded slightly, his expression tightening just a fraction, not in disagreement, but in recognition, because the clarity of the moment had stripped away the usual layers, the routine, the assumptions, leaving something more direct behind, something harder to look away from. The wipers continued their steady rhythm, marking time in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if each pass was another second to think, another second to process. He did not try to stop it, Cole added after a pause, his voice thoughtful. Even when he could have, Hayes exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening slightly on the wheel before relaxing again. No, he said. He let it happen. And that truth carried more weight now than before, because it was no longer just about control, it was about choice. Marcus had chosen silence when he could have spoken, chosen patience when he could have ended it sooner, and that choice had revealed everything. Cole leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees for a second before sitting back again. That means he trusted something, he said, not fully finishing the thought, but enough for it to be understood. Hayes nodded once. Slow, deliberate, not something, he corrected quietly, someone. And the distinction mattered, because it shifted the focus entirely. It was not just about systems or procedures, it was about people, about decisions made in real time, under pressure, without certainty. The road curved again ahead, the patrol car following it smoothly, headlights cutting through the rain in a narrow beam, illuminating just enough to keep moving forward. Hayes glanced briefly at the rearview mirror, expecting to see something behind them. But there was nothing, just darkness and rain, the past already swallowed by distance. You think we passed? Cole asked suddenly, the question almost out of place, but not entirely, because it had been building beneath everything else. Hayes did not answer right away, his eyes returning to the road, his expression tightening slightly as he considered it, not as a simple yes or no, but as something more complex, something that could not be measured so easily. I do not think that was the point, he said finally, his voice steady, grounded in a way it had not been earlier. Cole frowned slightly. Then what was? Hayes paused, just for a moment, letting the sound of the rain fill the space again, then answered, quieter than before, but clearer. To see if we would notice, he said, and the words settled into the car, into the space between them, into the silence that followed, because noticing meant more than just seeing. It meant understanding, it meant acknowledging what had happened and what it meant. And as the patrol car continued down the highway, the realization did not fade. It grew, steady and unavoidable, because some moments were not meant to be passed or failed. They were meant to be understood, and once understood, they changed everything that came after. The rain began to ease, not stopping completely, but softening into a lighter rhythm, the kind that no longer demanded attention but lingered quietly in the background. And the highway ahead stretched wider now, more open, the lines clearer under the headlights, as if the road itself was revealing more than it had before. Hayes adjusted his grip on the wheel, his movements smoother, more intentional, not out of habit but awareness, the kind that comes after something shifts inside and does not return to what it was. Cole sat beside him, quieter than before, his gaze no longer drifting but focused, steady, like he was no longer searching for answers but holding on to the ones that had already begun to form. You know what is strange? Cole said after a while, his voice calm but thoughtful. Hayes glanced at him briefly, then back to the road. What? He asked, and Cole took a breath, not rushed, just measured. He never made it about himself, he said, and that detail settled in immediately, because it had been there the entire time, hidden in plain sight. Marcus had not argued his position, had not used authority to shut things down the moment he could have. He had not demanded recognition. He had simply stood there and allowed the moment to unfold. Hayes nodded slowly, the realization deepening as he replayed it again. Yeah, he said. He did not need to prove anything. And that truth carried weight, because it shifted the meaning of everything that had happened. It was not about power in the way they had understood it. It was about something quieter, something more controlled. Cole leaned back slightly, his shoulders settling into the seat. That kind of restraint, he continued, that takes more control than anything we try to show out there. Hayes exhaled softly, the words landing exactly where they needed to, because control was not what he thought it was at the start of the night. It was not volume, not presence, not assumption. It was precision, timing, and the willingness to wait. The patrol car moved past an exit ramp, the green sign flashing briefly in the headlights before disappearing behind them. And Hayes realized something then, something simple but undeniable. The moment had not ended when Marcus drove away. It had followed them, settled into the quiet space of the car, into every thought that came after. He gave us a chance, Hayes said suddenly, the words coming out before he had fully formed them. Cole turned slightly, his attention sharpening. A chance? He repeated, and Hayes nodded, his eyes still on the road but his focus elsewhere. Yeah, he said, to do it right before it mattered. The silence that followed was different, not heavy, not uncertain, but clear, like something had finally been understood. Cole considered it for a moment, then gave a small nod, accepting it without resistance, because it fit. It explained the patience, the calm, the lack of urgency. Marcus had not been waiting for them to fail. He had been waiting to see if they would choose differently, if they would notice. Hayes adjusted the speed slightly, the engine responding with a low, steady hum. The road ahead still long, still quiet, but no longer the same. And we almost did not, Cole said, his voice lower now, not accusatory, just honest. Hayes did not deny it, did not push back, because there was nothing to argue. No, he said, we almost did not. And that truth settled in, not as guilt, not as regret, but as awareness, the kind that stays, the kind that changes how the next moment is handled before it even begins. The rain continued to fade, the windshield clearing more with each pass of the wipers, and the patrol car moved forward into a stretch of road that felt quieter, more open, but also more real, because now they were not just driving through the night. They were carrying something with them, something that would shape what came next, something that could not be ignored. Because once you see clearly, you do not go back to guessing. And for the first time since the stop began, the road ahead did not feel uncertain. It felt like a choice. The road opened into a long stretch of dry pavement ahead, the rain finally fading into nothing more than a memory on the windshield, the wipers slowing, then stopping altogether, leaving the glass clear for the first time that night. And the silence that followed felt different, not heavy, not uncertain, but settled, like something had reached its final shape without needing to be forced. Hayes kept driving, steady, controlled, his eyes fixed ahead but no longer searching, because there was nothing left to find out there. Everything that mattered had already happened. Cole shifted slightly in his seat, rolling his shoulders once as if releasing the last of the tension he had been carrying since the stop, his gaze drifting briefly to the side mirror, then back forward, the darkness behind them now just distance, not something waiting to catch up. You know, Cole said quietly, his voice calm, almost reflective. I do not think he was trying to change us. Hayes did not look at him, but he listened, really listened, because the difference now was not in what was said, but in how it was received. No, Hayes replied after a moment, his tone even, grounded. I think he was just showing us something. Cole nodded slightly, letting the words settle, because that felt right. There had been no lecture, no confrontation, no attempt to correct or control, just a moment, allowed to unfold exactly as it was. And in that, everything had been revealed. Hayes adjusted the wheel slightly as the road curved, the motion smooth, almost effortless, like his hands knew what to do without needing to think about it. And maybe that was the difference now. Less reaction, more awareness. He never raised his voice, Hayes said quietly, almost as if reminding himself. Cole gave a small exhale, something close to a half laugh, but without humor. He did not have to, he replied, and they both understood why, because power had not been in the volume, not in the authority displayed. It had been in the certainty, the patience, the willingness to let the truth speak for itself. The patrol car continued forward, the hum of the engine steady, the road ahead clear, and for the first time, it did not feel like they were moving away from something. It felt like they were moving with it, carrying it forward into whatever came next. Hayes glanced briefly at the dashboard, at the dark camera lens that reflected nothing now, and then back to the road. Next time, he said slowly, choosing the words with care, we do it differently from the start. Cole did not hesitate this time. Yeah, he said, firm, certain in a way that felt earned, not assumed, and the agreement between them was quiet but real, not spoken for the sake of ending the moment, but because they understood what it meant. The highway stretched on ahead, empty but open, the lines clear, the path visible, and there was something almost symbolic in that, something simple but undeniable, because the night had not changed the road, it had changed how they saw it. Hayes eased his grip on the wheel just slightly, not losing control, just adjusting. And as the patrol car moved forward into the distance, there was no dramatic ending, no sudden shift, just a quiet continuation, the kind that carries meaning without needing to announce it, and somewhere far ahead, beyond the reach of their headlights, another set of taillights moved steadily through the night, unseen but understood, not as something to chase, not as something to control, but as a reminder that some people do not need to prove power, they only need to reveal it. And once revealed, it changes everything that follows, even long after the moment itself has passed.